This video is brought to you by ObjectiveMarkers.com. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last weekend of competitive play, talk about what's doing well and what is at the top of the metagame. And it's a crazy week this week, with Black Templars now hitting the field, coming from their new codex. I am recording to you from the road as I'm coming back from the Summer Slaughter Summer Assault GT, where we did see some Black Templars take to the tabletops. We had some incredible games over there at the event, so if you want to watch my coverage of that, I will drop a link down in the video description. Highly recommend the day one games. At the very least, those games were all insane nail biters, so that was really cool to see. But with that, without too much further ado, let's go ahead and hop into a metagame breakdown and talk about what is currently winning at the top tables of competitive Warhammer 40,000. And this week looks really weird. Normally, we would see Death Guard and Knights up at the top here, given those factions have been dominant for the last couple of months, but it seems like either the metagame is shifting in response to the dominance of those factions, or many players simply aren't playing with them. So we've seen a redistribution of positive results to a wide variety of factions. This includes Drukhari as our #1 spot, taking down the Miniature Mayhem Summer Slaughter, that is not to be confused with the Summer Assault GT Summer Slaughter, two separate Summer Slaughters, the BrawlCon GT, and Battle of the Ragnar. We also saw, of course, Death Guard doing well at Ramarick Industries, as well as the Summer Slaughter Summer Assault. That was the event that I live streamed. Death Guard did take that one down. What a time to be alive. Several Space Marine chapters also doing fairly well. Not only Blood Angels, who took down the VT GT, Abyss GT, and Battle of the Ragnar, but also Black Templars, who took down the Dumpster Fire GT and Denver 40k Fight Club. I am going to be talking about both of these results because they both used the new Black Templars Codex, and that's going to be the focus of the show this week. Tau Empire also took down the Ragnarok GT, as well as going undefeated at the Denver 40k Fight Club. Dark Angels winning at the Hero 02, Hour 02 Heroes Unchained event. Imperial Knights did show up at the Game Bunker August GT, not in the same volume as we've seen them in the past. It seems like things are slowly shifting around to defeat them. It has seemed like a lot of armies, things like Eldar, Astra Militarum to some extent, and of course Death Guard, are pretty tuned to destroy Knight lists, and while many other factions are being repressed by the dominance of Knights, those armies being relatively well suited means that Knights have a tough time getting to the finals tables. Same goes with Chaos Knights, who took down the 40k Brawl August GT. We saw Chaos Demons take down the GT Golden Dawn 3. Necrons win the North Star Open, as well as Adeptus Mechanicus at the Grillin Dice event, as well as last and maybe least, Leagues of Votann taking down the Toys of Mass Destruction. Now, normally I wouldn't talk about Leagues of Votann this week because they are staring down the barrel of a brand new codex, so the rules that we're going to talk about right now are going to be outdated in a week or two. However, they did take a very non-standard list, which I'm very excited to discuss. And we will jump into all of those lists in a moment, just after a word from our sponsors. This video is sponsored by ObjectiveMarkers.com. Now, if you play 40k, you know what an objective marker looks like. They're 7.5-ish inch circles that we use to denote the 40mm objective pucks and their zone of control on the battlefield. And oftentimes we'll play with neoprene versions, but I have talked about other versions of polymer objective markers in the past, and ObjectiveMarkers.com offers a unique take on this formula. Polymer objective markers have a ton of advantages over the more standard neoprene. They are clear, which allows you to showcase terrain features and battle mats underneath them without disrupting the immersion of the game. ObjectiveMarkers.com offers a wide variety of designs themed to a bunch of different 40k factions that mesh with the battlefield in a way that a garish neoprene objective marker won't. They're also flexible and highly resilient, in addition to being much smaller than a neoprene marker, making them much easier to store. So check them out at ObjectiveMarkers.com. Shop around for a design that matches your faction aesthetic, and I'll see you with them on the battlefield. So now to get started, let's hop into the Black Crow Gaming's Battle of the Ragnar GT. This was a 40-player GT being held in the UK. The event was won by Blood Angels, but saw a 5-0 result from Darren Chapman, one of the several Drukhari players to go undefeated this weekend. Darren was playing a Real Space Raid detachment. This is the original index detachment that will grant the army additional pain tokens at the start of the game. It's been mostly overshadowed more recently by subsequent detachment releases. Sky Splinter Assault as well as Reaper's Wager are both generally more powerful, but they lack the consistency of those additional starting pain tokens. Now, this list was taking an Archon as well as Lilith, Hesperax, and Urian Rakarth. That unlocks the maximum number of additional pain tokens by creating the trifecta of Archon, Succubus in the case of Lilith, as well as a Homunculus from Urian. We have a Cabalite Warrior squad in addition to several units of Rax, 3 units of 5, 1 unit of 10 Witches for Lilith to join into to make use of her leadership ability, a Court of the Archon to hang out with the Archon himself, several units of Chronos, including 1 individual Chronos and 1 unit of 2 Chronos. That's actually an interesting inclusion. It does give you a little bit of a sweet Overwatch threat with their Torrent weapons. Also makes those Chronos a little bit tougher to take down, so they can take more central positions to generate your additional pain tokens without necessarily going down. Nice thing about the Chronos is that it is cheap, but it doesn't die super quickly, so you can play a little bit more aggressively with them without necessarily losing your support units. We have 1 unit of Mandrakes for some scoring alongside a Reaver Jetbike unit, 3 units of Scourges. These are all 30 model Scourge units, interestingly, which means that they have a lot of additional beef in the unit in order to protect them from incoming shooting, and especially things like indirect fire from Plague Burst Crawlers, for example, aren't necessarily going to knock out the heavy weapons from the Scourges, since you have to get through 6 wounds in order to actually get to the heavy weapon models in each team. Now, this includes 1 Heat Lance unit, as well as 2 Haywire Blaster units, and then obviously Shard Carbines on those 6 additional models inside each unit. From there, we have the standard 3 units of 2 Talos. Now, inside Real Space Race, the Talos have a lot of very powerful stratagems to improve their survivability. This was, for a really long time, kind of the bread and butter of these Drukhari armies. They have things like Insensible to Pain to make them even tankier than they already are in order to be able to deliver their relatively powerful melee. Now, the downside for the Talos here is that they are relatively slow and kind of doddering when it comes to getting them up the table, but if you are already sort of keeping your opponent's head down and or absorbing damage on things like those Scourge units, then the Talos are probably going to be able to make it there. Now, what's interesting is that we have literally no transports whatsoever in this list. So we do have a bunch of the individual racks that can act as utility units, but we don't have anything like Raiders or Venoms in order to split out things like the Cabalite Warrior units or Lilith Hesperax's Witches into smaller bricks. So those are all going to be running around just by themselves in units of 10. I imagine this list is doing a lot of reserve play to get those into the fight and be able to outmaneuver their opponent. But this list is super interesting and incredibly weird, at least in comparison to styles of Drukhari that we've seen in the past. Now, next up, we would talk about Death Guard. I don't know if we need to really touch on Death Guard. Most of the Death Guard armies were playing a Mortarian's Hammer, including a Knight Despoiler in them right now. And we've talked at length about Death Guard in every video in this series for the last 2 months or so. So I don't know. If you want to see a Death Guard list, go check out my day 2 coverage from Summer Assault, and basically every undefeated Death Guard list looked like that one. And let's move on. Now, we'll stay with Black Crow Gaming's Battle of the Ragnar as we move on to talk about our first Space Marine chapter of the day, this being Blood Angels. Now, Toby Bennett won that event using Blood Angels, and in this case, a Liberator Assault group, including a Rage-Fueled Warrior Captain, as well as a Chaplain with Speed of the Primarch for a once per game fight first. Oftentimes, the Chaplain will be attached into a unit like a Blade Guard Veteran Squad. Yeah, so we do have a 6-man unit of Blade Guard Veterans to give them +1 to wound, as well as to shore up their relatively low base strength characteristic, but then also that +1 that fight first makes them very difficult to engage with as they maneuver up the table. We have another fight first threat in the form of Chief Librarian Mephiston, who's going to be able to also just act as a super useful lone operative, a relatively fast threat that can wander around, hold down objectives, complete secondary objectives, and be difficult for your opponent to engage with. We have a Death Company Jump Pack captain, but alongside we have Lombardies as well. So we're probably running 2 Death Company squads in here. One of them likely to be a 5-man with that jump pack captain. We'll go down here and take a peek. Yeah. So a 5-man of Death Company jump packs to go with the captain, so that it gives you a relatively inexpensive, less than 200 points melee threat that can sort of engage on its own. We then also have a unit of 10 that will attach with Lombardies to benefit from -1 damage and just be super duper duper tanky. And then last but certainly not least, we also then have a combi weapon lieutenant for some additional utility. To hold down the backline, we have an intercessor squad alongside an impulsor. That impulsor is going to be probably trading out between the Blood Angels captain with Ragefield Warrior and the Blade Guard veteran squad. We can start one of those in the transport, send them off to go nuke something, and then refill the transport with the second unit, or just let the Blade Guard veterans sort of wander up the table by themselves. They do have a bunch of wounds in that invulnerable save, and then also fight first if your opponent has strong melee. We have 3 units of assault intercessors with jump packs in order to add some additional utility and disruption. The Blade Guard veteran squad I mentioned before, all the Death Company that I mentioned, 2 units of Outriders. Now the Outriders are actually kind of lesser used technology inside Blood Angels, but they are extremely strong. They gain a passive +1 strength and damage bonus on the charge, and that stacks with the +2 strength and +1 attack that you gain from the Liberator Assault Group detachment ability. And that means these Outriders swing 5 times with strength 7, damage 2 chainswords, which is actually an insane amount of damage for a unit that's only 80 points. So they can clip through medium infantry. They're really fast with advance and charge. They're just a little bit slower than a jump pack intercessor squad. The only downside is, of course, that they have to move around terrain. Otherwise, they are just about the same speed, with the difference that they will pay for pivoting if they need to. But then they can run in and clip through heavier targets than your jump pack assault intercessors might otherwise be able to, because they have that 2 damage. The downside Outriders have is the lower AP, but the other thing about Outriders is that having 4 wounds apiece, and obviously like a Space Marine defensive profile, means that oftentimes they don't really easily die, and you'll more often than not find individual Outriders sort of running around as the game moves on, especially if your opponent's being overloaded by all of the jump pack assault intercessors plus the Outriders sort of pushing up on you. We then have a pair of scout squads for some additional utility. A Stern Guard veteran squad, that's where the Ragefield Warrior captain's going to be, so when he attacks the Oath of the Moment target, you get wound rerolls in addition to your hit rerolls. And we have a Vanguard veteran squad for some additional utility too. So mostly the big damage is coming out of the Death Company, the Jump Pack Death Company, the Stern Guard veterans, and the Blade Guard veteran squads. Those are kind of the big bricks. But then we also have, if we include the Outriders, basically 6 of these smaller utility units that can run around. They can knock enemies off objectives, and with their powers combined, if you stack a couple of these smaller units like Vanguard veterans and jump pack intercessors onto a big target, they could take it down with that Liberator Assault Group detachment ability. Really flexible list. The Liberator Assault Group really makes these little utility squads incredibly dangerous, so it's cool to see an army that is really focused almost entirely on those. Now with that, we're going to move over to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania for the Dumpster Fire GT Nova Prep Edition. This was a smaller event, 26 players, but was won by David Anderson running brand new Black Templars. So let's dive into this and talk about exactly how this army's working. Now, for those who don't know, this new Black Templars Codex is very different than previous Space Marine chapter supplements. First of all, it replaces the army's Oath of Moment ability with a Templar Vow ability. That allows the army to swear a Templar Vow at the start of the first battle round to gain a particular bonus. Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch gives you reroll charges and precision targeting Psyker units, except any challenge no matter the odds, gives you a really interesting reverse transhuman effect, where if your strength characteristic is lower or equal to the toughness value of your target, you gain +1 to wound, meaning you can never wound on worse than a 5, which is an incredible bonus for a mass chainsword faction like Black Templars. Suffer Not the Unclean to Live gives you fallback and charge, as well as additional flexibility on your pile-in or consolidation moves, and Uphold the Honor of the Emperor gives you your infantry objective secured and advance and perform actions. Now, in this case, we are running a Gladius Task Force, which is obviously one of the strongest detachments in the game and can benefit from all of the enhanced datasheets that Black Templars got in their new supplement. Many Black Templars units shore up the lack of Oaths of Moment with some built-in rerolls, meaning that they can kind of ape the effects of Oath of Moment from a lot of other factions in exchange for having an additional army ability. And then on top of that, you're also comboing that with the incredible flexibility of Gladius Task Force. So this includes a standard captain with Honor Vehement to give him a bonus strength and attacks based on the combat doctrine that you've selected. We have 2 Castellans, which have a leadership test ability to grant their units reroll hit rolls in the fight phase, as well as command point generation each time their unit destroys enemies in melee. We have an Emperor's Champion protected by Artificer Armor to give him a 2+ armor save and a 5+ feel no pain. That can also combo with his own built-in Armor of Faith, which grants him a once per phase damage blank. So you're already sitting on a 2+ armor save thanks to Artificer Armor with a 5+ feel no pain and a 4+ invulnerable save baked in on the Emperor's Champion. You also get a damage blank on top of that, and then obviously like you could sink damage on the feel no pain. So that guy ends up being very difficult to kill. We then also have a pair of Marshals. These guys have just a trillion melee attacks. There's swinging at a baseline 8 strength 5 AP2 2 damage melee attacks with lethal hits, and their leadership ability is improved critical, so 5 up critical hits. There are 2 units of Sword Brethren to join these guys into, and most of the Sword Brethren have a combination of sustained or lethal hits, which then obviously is benefited by the Marshals baked in improved critical effect. We have an Assault Intercessor Squad, an Impulsor to deliver some of our melee units. That Assault Intercessor Squad is probably just hanging out with our Honor Vehement Captain to give him wound rerolls. We then also have 2 units of Jump Pack Assault Intercessors to act as a little bit of disruption. Some shooting, backline shooting from 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts. Again, these aren't necessarily a Black Templars profile, but they do have a built-in reroll effect for themselves, so they are going to be able to work without needing Oaths of Moment. They're sort of self-sufficient. They also give you a good outlet for your ranged buffs in the detachment, so things like Devastator Doctrine and Storm of Fire are all great on Ballistus Dreadnoughts. We have an Outrider Squad, a Black Templars Repulsor Executioner that gains hit rerolls if it targets enemies that are spotted by another friendly Adeptus Astartes unit within 12 inches of them, meaning that they are very, very self-sufficient in this detachment. And again, first of all, don't need Oaths of Moment to be good, but then also benefit from all of the ranged synergies that we get inside our Gladius Task Force. We have a Standard Scout Squad for utility. Those 2 Sword Brethren squads I mentioned before, these could even embark into the Repulsor Executioners potentially, and because the Executioners have a 7 model transport capacity, we can dual attach the Castellan with the Marshal. The Castellans can grant their hit reroll effect to then trigger in greater volume the enhanced critical hits that the Marshal is granting to the Sword Brethren and to himself. He also has lethal hits on his own sword as well, so he's going to be generating a lot of additional value. The Castellan is the same way. They also have either sustained or lethal hits based on the weapon that they choose. Most likely Mastercrafted Power Weapons for 6 Strength 5 AP2 2 damage melee attacks, again with hit re-rolling 5 up critical lethal hits. So the damage from these little combined units is absolutely incredible. For 250 points, you get a total of 29 Strength 5 AP2 2 damage lethal hit attacks that critical on 5s, reroll their hit rolls to try to generate those criticals. It's a ton of incoming damage, and again, you can also bonus AP that with Onto the Chapter, so pretty crazy. This is a very aggressive melee army, so you don't want to be interrupted on, so we are also including a Calidus Assassin to CP tax our opponents. Absolutely crazy combinations available to these units. The combo of the Sword Brethren alongside all those characters to buff up their attacks sounds absolutely insanely lethal for a unit that is relatively small and relatively self-sufficient. And then given the fact that you're also backing that up with really powerful self-sufficient shooting, this army looks absolutely horrifying. Now that's not all for Black Templars, because we also saw them do well at one of the larger events of the weekend, the Denver 40k Fight Club August Open. This was an 84-player event, closer to major size, and ran a full 6 rounds with 2 undefeated, one being Ben Neal rocking Black Templars, who ended in first place. Now, Ben was playing a lot of the same combinations that we just discussed in the previous list with some additional flair. First of all, instead of taking the Artificer Armor on the Emperor's Champion, we're taking it on Gravis Harbor Captain. We've seen this thing in Ultramarine lists in ages past. He's just an incredibly resilient utility unit. He becomes a base 2+ save and has free stratagems available, so he can use Armor of Contempt, for example, for free, or Squad Tactics to reactive move himself, which makes him really difficult to pinned down. On top of that, he's also 6 wounds with a 5+ feel no pain thanks to Artificer armor, and also he has incoming damage. So he's just ridiculously hard to kill, and most armies take much more than his points value to actually get rid of him. We then have a pair of Castellans, as well as the pair of Marshals that we talked about previously. We have 2 Sword Brethren squads in this army as well, so it's likely that we're doing the same combination of attachments where we have the Castellan for rerolls, the Marshal for enhanced criticals, attach those into a unit with mass lethal hits power swords, and that's going to generate a bunch of incoming damage into a wide variety of targets. We do have the Honor Vehement on an Emperor's Champion, so additional attacks and strength on that guy. That brings him up to a base strength 9, potentially up to strength 10 if you are in Assault Doctrine. So he himself can do some kind of crazy damage. We then also have Chaplain Grimaldus, the Chaplain character. Now, he's going to be granting his unit hit rerolls, but he can also grant +1 to advance and charge. He himself is a little expensive, although he's not the most expensive thing in the world. But he can attach it to a variety of units, including things like Assault Intercessors, and we can grant advance and charge in the Gladius Task Force detachment with Assault Doctrine. So, +1 to advance and charge is essentially a +2-inch threat range increase, which is quite a bit. If you don't need that increase, he can also grant +1 AP to the unit's melee weapons on top of that in exchange. So we do have 2 Assault Intercessor squads. I do believe that it looks to me like we are going to be joining Chaplain Grimaldus into one of those in most games, I imagine. There's also a Combi Weapon Lieutenant I should mention for utility as well. So 2 of these independent characters. We have an Impulsor to carry one of these melee bricks to the fight. Now, Grimaldus himself, I believe, is just baseline a 5-model unit or a 4-model unit with his 3 little relic servitors. So I don't believe he fits into any of the transports in the army. So he's probably just ground pounding and using his enhanced movement effect to get his unit up the table. However, the Impulsor can carry one of the Sword Brethren squads, and we can put the Emperor's Champion into one of the Assault Intercessor squads to potentially grant him wound rerolls as well, which is incredible if he can trigger his devastating wounds once per game. We have a Jump Back Assault Intercessor unit for utility, a Ballistus Dreadnought, and a Gladiator Lancer. So again, self-sufficient shooting here. The Ballistus Dreadnought gets hit rerolls against enemies above half starting strength. The Gladiator Lancer has its floating hit wound damage reroll all the time, and so they're good at dealing long-range damage. We have 2 Repulsor Executioners, as I mentioned in the last list, for the same reason, a Scout Squad, as well as a pair of Sword Brethren squads. Again, very similar vibe to the previous list, but very slight differences, which I think is really interesting. Now, we're going to remain on Denver 40k Fight Club for a moment here to talk about this second place placement, Tau Empire. John Kilcommons taking a faction to an undefeated record. Now, I'm kind of excited to talk about this list in particular because John was playing an Auxiliary Cadre. This is the online release detachment that went under the radar for a really long time, despite having a selection of some of the most insane stratagems ever printed. Now, this detachment encourages use of auxiliary units, so Vespid and Crute units, alongside Tau allies. This grants you improved armor penetration characteristic while you attack enemies within 9 inches of auxiliary, as well as a lone operative effect when near your non-auxiliary Tau units. So there's a little bit of a give and take. Now, we're taking Commander Shadowsun, so we get a baked-in reroll aura, as well as 3 individual broadside battlesuits. Now, these guys are rocking missiles as well as heavy rail rifles. Those missiles obviously benefit quite immensely from the +1 AP that the detachment's granting you, but they also are then able to wander around and project that 18-inch lone operative effect. We have 3 Ghost Kill battlesuits. Those are natural lone operatives, so you can make an entire corner of the battlefield entirely unshootable from outside 18 inches, because the Ghost Kill battlesuit can't be shot within 12. It can stand next to an auxiliary unit and then make that auxiliary unit not attackable within 18, meaning that most of your opponent's army is unlikely to be able to interact with that little combo. Now, from there, we have 3 units of Krutox Rampagers, 2 units of 6, as well as a unit of 3. Those guys can be protected from turn 1 by that anti-shoot effect that your Tau units are going to be projecting. You also gain advance and charge from Alien Expertise, and you can use experimental modifications to grant them +1 AP and melee as well. So these guys actually become kind of insane. So if you have the command points to spend, these guys become kind of insane melee damage dealers. And we have Commander Shadowsun to potentially regenerate our command points when we spend them on units near her. We then have a Pathfinder team for some early game forward operation, 2 units of Skyray gunships for backline shooting, alongside 2 units of stealth battlesuits for some spotting, and some additional utility from 2 units of Vespid Stingwings. These guys are the guys that we are most likely going to be running in order to provide that +1 AP bonus to all of the Tau proper. It's been a really long time since we've seen this detachment, and it's cool to see it on the table because it definitely looks like it was pretty strong on release, but unfortunately the datasheets it was applying its effects to weren't the most exciting things in the world. That said, it does have stratagems like interlocking maneuvers, which allows you to make a full fallback move at the end of the fight phase if you are eligible to fight that phase, which allows you to do insane movements like moving and charging a Ghost Kill battlesuit into a target, remaining engaged with that target, then performing a full movement fallback at the end of the fight phase to steal your opponent's objectives or to complete secondary objectives. Now from there, let's move over to Germany for Hour 02, Heroes Unchained. This is a 40-player GT, and it was won by friend of the channel, Jan Reisenauer, playing Dark Angels. Jan was playing none other than a Company of Hunters list, and I know that this style of army is a huge fan favorite among both Space Marine and Dark Angels fans. This grants the entire army advance, fallback, and shoot, as well as your mounted units advance and charge on top of that. We're going to be leaning into that by taking 2 Ravenwing command squads, one of them with Master of Maneuver to come out of strategic reserves early, and one of them with Recon Hunter for a 9-inch scout. If everything comes together, that allows you to scout a unit 9 inches up to the center of the battlefield, go second, have your opponent move forward, rapid ingress 1 Ravenwing command squad, and then immediately at the bottom of the first turn, advance, shoot, and charge, and hit your opponent with 2 fully powered Ravenwing command squads in the bottom of the first turn. We also can compound that with things like Lionel Johnson redeploying himself up the battlefield, chosen in your command phase, so he can get his reroll 1s to hit and wounded melee aura online on enemies early, and we're fueling this aggression with Azrael to generate CP. Now from there, we're playing a pair of Outrider squads, as well as 2 trios of Centurion Devastators. These guys are beneficial because they can gain hit rerolls by themselves, so they don't necessarily need any input from the rest of your army in order to deal their damage. And having the ability to just permanently advance, fall back, and still shoot is going to be good for these guys, since a lot of army units can engage them. Very rarely can you easily kill them because of their high toughness and saves. So that being able to just pull them out of melee and then continue blasting is incredibly effective. We have 2 scout squads as well in order to add some utility. 3 Vindicators, again, incredibly good units if they can permanently advance and still shoot. A Stern Guard Veteran squad, which is going to attach Azrael into it. He grants them sustained hits, which is useful because they're largely going to be attacking the Oath of Moment target, and then they will grant him wound rerolls, and given that all of his weapons are devastating, that can actually mean that he does kind of an insane amount of damage. We actually live streamed a Dark Angels game over the course of the weekend, and this combination of Azrael and Stern Guard Veterans basically halfway killed a knight in melee by themselves, which is pretty wild. Now, we're not running actual Ravenwing Black Knights, but that does mean that the Ravenwing command squads attached into the Outrider squads are going to be gaining the benefits of those Outriders +1 strength and damage on the charge. That puts things like our Ravenwing Champion inside of each of those units to strength 6, damage 3. And you're also bringing the just regular Black Knight combat weapons on the rest of the models, which is definitely not bad. Given the fact that these units are, without paying all of the points for large Ravenwing bricks, Ravenwing Black Knight bricks, the Outrider plus Command Squad units are relatively points efficient, which lets you trade them a lot more readily for smaller enemy units to then pin your opponent in their deployment zone and keep them off of your more powerful guns that are going to be sitting in the second row. Those Vindicators sort of posting up behind this push of Outriders and Command Squads can take up positions and then get 2 to 3 turns of blasting into your opponent's army, which is usually enough to be able to kill them, down to the point that they can't really effectively launch a counterattack. Now, the 26-player Game Bunker August GT was won by Andrew Valter, who was playing Imperial Knights. This was a noble lance with mostly expected stuff. We had Canis Rex, a pair of Atropos, a Warden, as well as 3 Armiger Warglaves and a Calidus Assassin for utility. Pretty cool, I guess. We had another, whatever reason, exactly 26-player GT, the 40k Brawl August GT, that was won by Chaos Knights. In this case, we're playing a Lord of Dread list with a bunch of big knights and 2 executioners. This was a trio of knight abominants because of their value for money, alongside a knight despoiler with double despoiler Gatling cannon, can use Titanic Duel in this detachment, so they can go kind of insane, as well as a Knight Rampager and 2 Wardog Executioner and a Wardog Stalker for the Scout. Okay, but now we're moving to South America. Colombia saw the GT Golden Dawn 3, a 46-player event. I don't know if I've covered an event from Colombia before, so this is sick. This event was won by Nicholas Francone, playing Chaos Demons, a man after my own heart. This was a demonic incursion detachment, so the original Codex detachment, and was a bit of a 5 greater demon demonic adventuring party, although we didn't bring any gun guys, so we're lacking our wizard. We largely only have fighters, I guess. This includes Bellicor to protect the army from shooting early, a Bloodthirster with Argath, the King of Blades, for +2 strength and attacks. That guy is incredibly effective in a Knights meta. If you're expecting to hit Knights, he will one-shot them most of the time, especially if you don't miss any of your attacks. If you can get him his hit rerolls from Bellicor, he will probably kill a Knight. We then have a Grid Unclean with Endless Gift to keep him alive. He can buff Rodriguez with +1 toughness. He's also in the list. Rodriguez, by the way, an incredible piece of board control just for holding objectives, because he's unable to have objectives stolen from him from OC1 models. He actually reduces them to OC0, so he can just hold objectives indefinitely against hordes of OC1 enemies. As soon as you go to OC2, things get a little bit tougher, but he is also incredibly good at killing large numbers of models, so that's not usually the end of the world for him. And a lot of factions just simply don't have ways to take objectives from him, so he's an incredibly powerful piece. We then have Scarbrand for his ridiculous damage output, a Plaguebearer unit to lock down the home objective and then teleport around the battlefield, taking other objectives with all the demonic incursion repositional effects. We have a Nurgling unit and a Beast of Nurgle for some early game forward operation, a Screamer unit for another unit of fast utility, plus 2 units of Fleshhounds, which have a natural up-down, so they're going to be able to consistently score over the course of the game. This list feels very specifically keyed towards killing big stuff, just blowing up big Knights and things. With their powers combined, the Grid and Clean ones are actually really good at punching up into big targets, especially since the Endless Gifts Grid and Clean one can absorb basically a round of attacking from almost any Knight chassis and won't go down. And then he can toughness debuff the opponent, get buffed up by Rodriguez, and probably hit them back for an insane amount of damage in the swing back. And then each of the Bloodthirsters is good at one-tapping super heavies. It's basically what they're entirely designed to do. Hefty screening or lots of utility units does feel like it would be a weakness of this style of demon build, but definitely this is not this is an effective composition. Now with that, we'll move over to Duluth, Minnesota for the 54-player North Star Open. This GT was won by Devin Orchard, who went 5-0 with Necrons. Devin was playing a Star Shatter Arsenal build. This is a relatively standard Star Shatter build. We've seen very similar versions of this in the past. This includes a Catacomb Command Barge with Dread Majesty for the reroll aura, Imhotep the Stormlord to fuel the expensive stratagems in the detachment with his command point generation, a Technomancer with Chrono Impedance Fields to give mostly the Silent King -1 damage, another Technomancer with Demanding Leader for fallback and operate normally, and the Silent King himself. We then have a Canoptek Reanimator, a Canoptek Spider to buff the vehicles, 2 units of Canoptek Wraiths. One of them has a Cryptothrall in it in order to attach those Technomancers, plus 2 Doomsday Arcs and some utility from a unit of Ophidian Destroyers. Relatively standard stuff from Star Shatter Arsenal today. Now that moves us over to Snowy Alaska for the 32-player Grillin' Dice 2025. This event was won by Levi Chester playing Adeptus Mechanicus. Levi was playing a Halo Screed Battle Clade. This included a Tech Priest Dominus with Cognitive Reinforcement to grant his unit both Conquer and Protector imperatives, giving them both +1 weapon skill and +1 ballistic skill baked in, as well as Assault, which is big on the ranged weapons. That's usually incredibly powerful for Breachers, Cataphront Breachers, which have both a strong melee and a strong ranged weapon. However, they normally lack the ability to optimize both of those effects unless they have this enhancement. Those guys also really appreciate having things like Advance in Charge from Predation Protocols or a +2 movement from Electromotive Energization. in order to improve their incredibly tepid speed. That allows them to advance. That allows them to potentially advance, shoot, then charge. All of that with +1 weapon skill, ballistic skill, which can definitely shore up the weaknesses of that unit quite a bit. We then have a Tech Priest Manipulus with Sanctified Ordnance. That's an additional 6 inches of range and reroll hazardous tests. That usually gets attached into a Cataphren Destroyer unit, but it looks like we're not going to be running that. We're just going to be putting it on a second Cataphren Breacher team. So both those Tech Priests are going to be jumping into Cataphren units, most likely. We then have a bunch of utility coming from our battle line. That includes 1 unit of Rangers, 1, 2, 3, 4 units of Skitarii Vanguard. So we have a lot of outlets for the enhanced effect of the Doctrina Imperatives because we have so much battle line running around. We can carry some of that to the table with a Scorpius Dune Rider, although we might have a Sicarian. We have 2 units of Taraxi Skystalkers, a unit of Sicarian Infiltrators for some forward operation, backline shooting from 2 units of Scorpius Disintegrators, and then, I see, we have Kyria Draxus. She's going to attach into one of those Skitarii Vanguard units, which can then jump into the Dune Rider, benefit from fire support from the Dune Rider to gain wound rerolls, and then basically very similar to the combo inside of the Custodian Guard with Inquisitor Draxus. She goes kind of insane once you gain wound rerolls on her because she's attacking 10 times with 2 damage weapons. She has relatively low strength, but she does have devastating wounds on some of those. But she's basically able to force a bunch of pretty decent saves onto your opponent, which makes her very good at clipping out sort of medium infantry. She also awkwardly has the grenades keyword, which not a lot of other stuff in the faction does, which is sometimes really nice. Now, with that, we'll move over to the 28-player Toys of Mass Destruction for our final list for the day. This event was won by James Marston, going 5-0 with Leagues of Votann. And again, the reason I want to talk about this is that this list is very different than we normally see. That sounds weird for a faction that, until the release of its codex, has like 6 datasheets in it. However, the reason for that is that we are running Hearthband, the online release detachment that I don't think I've ever talked about on this series because I don't think it's ever seriously been played competitively, which is insane. This detachment grants reroll hit rolls of 1 on non-blast weapons, targeting the closest eligible target, and +1 AP if you are a Hearthguard unit or you have a Call or Uthar the Destined attached. Now, this list includes an Einhir champion with Bastion Shield to give him an Armor of Contempt effect when enemies shoot him from within 12 inches. So the idea with this guy is it affects his entire unit, but he can deep strike close to enemies and then force them to attack him at short distance, then benefiting from the Bastion Shield. If you just walk away from them, they won't get the benefit, but obviously that will force your opponent farther back, and that will probably give you a good board state. We then have a Call with High Call, which gives his unit a 4+ fight on death. Pretty expensive for 30 points, but definitely useful if you have something with a high value melee attack like a Hearthguard unit. We have a unit of Hearthkin Warriors alongside a Sagittor to split them into 5s in order to give our several utility units. We have a big, huge unit of 10 Chthonian Berserks. Now, the detachment ability does affect melee weapons that attack enemies engaging you, so the Chthonian Berserks are going to gain hit rerolls of 1, which can shore up their otherwise sometimes inconsistent melee profiles. And then we have a ton of Einhir Hearthguard, 30 Einhir Hearthguard. Depending on the new points values of the new codex, this might be one of the last hurrahs for Einhir Hearthguard, to be perfectly honest, but we'll see. We'll see how they roll out. We do have attachments for all of these. We have the Bastion Plate guy that can go into one of them. Uthar the Destined can jump into one, and obviously we have the Last Call who can jump into the last one. Now, one of these Einhir Hearthguard units is equipped with Vulcanite Disintegrators. The other 2 are equipped with Edisar Plasma Guns. We do have Fury of the Hearth in this attachment to give those units rapid fire. So if they're able to teleport in and jump within half range of those weapons, it actually doubles the damage output of the unit, which obviously is pretty nice. If you can attack something that's all judgmented up, those guys are going to do some pretty serious damage. And again, thanks to the not that recent anymore, but the relatively recent addition to the Leagues of Votann Index, you do still get to choose things to get judgment tokens at the start of the game, even if you're not playing in Oathband. We then have a couple of utility units to run in, score objectives, and then hopefully die to generate judgment tokens for the army. This includes 3 units of 3 Hernkin Pioneers, as well as a unit of 10 Hernkin Jaegers. What an absolutely insane army, chat, and what a very nice end cap to the Leagues of Votann index. I think this is probably the last index list we'll talk about ever on this channel for Leagues of Votann, and it's an insane one. So huge congratulations to James Marsden for winning with an insane list. And with that, that is all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video, everybody. Thanks to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring this video. Really appreciate their support of the channel. And thanks to everybody who supports me, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing. And I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.